So I've been covering cut and removed content from the Bioshock series for quite a few years now, and it never ceases to amaze me just how much is actually cut from each individual game. For example, Bioshock Infinite had roughly 3 to 5 games worth of content that was removed from the finished product, which still blows my mind to this day, but I do understand that some content, some concepts, and some ideas just genuinely need to be removed from the finished games. So with that being said, I do have a whole playlist on these particular videos down in the description below if you want to check it out after this one, but I wanted to give you guys a solid 20 minutes of cut or removed content from the Bioshock series. So with that being said, would you kindly sit back, relax, and if you enjoy the video by the end, leave a like and subscribe. It's free and it helps the channel out a ton. So without any further delay, let's get into the video. So for this video, I'm going to be going in order, starting from the original Bioshock and then moving all the way until the Burial at Sea episodes. So the first Bioshock piece of removed cut content was that it was supposed to have a single ending. Now, originally, Bioshock was going to have one ending with a sort of ambiguous ending, so it would have been up to you to interpret what that would have meant. And Ken Levine actually remarked in an article, which I'll link in the description along with all of the sources, that, quote, "There are a million different things you can do in every combat. You can play it in a million different ways. Looking into the future for the franchise, there's something I want to figure out, that by the time you get to the ending of that choice path, you have a sense of your impact on the world through lots of little permutations rather than a giant like ending piece, if you follow my meaning." So yeah, Bioshock having an original ending or just a singular ending is kind of crazy when you think about it in hindsight, because now we have multiple endings for both Bioshock 1 and 2. So I'm glad that one was personally removed. Next up, we have the research machine. Now, this isn't to be confused with the camera that we actually receive in the game. This was going to be another machine like the Circus of Values or the Ammo Bandito machines. So this would have been more or less to obtain your research rewards. And as I mentioned, it would have been similar to those other vending machines. You would have given an item to receive an item. In this case, it would have basically been your overall processed and finished photographs that you took. So that one, I'm glad didn't make it in the cut, because it just seems like it would have been awkward to have to take the picture, then go to the station, develop your photo, and then rinse and repeat. It just seems kind of tedious in my personal opinion. Now, when I say the two words dual wielding, you might think about dual wielding weapons, like having 2 shotguns out, or 2 pistols, or something akimboed like from the Call of Duty series. Well, initially in Bioshock 1, we were going to be able to have some sort of dual wielding mechanic. However, that was implemented in Bioshock 2 instead of Bioshock 1. And what we would have gotten in Bioshock 1 was Jack being able to use a weapon with one hand and have it out and ready, while also being able to use a plasmid with the other, again, out and ready at the same time. Again, it was cut from the game and ultimately placed within Bioshock 2. We're going to move on to a level now, and this one is my personal favorite. This is one that I've talked about many times on the channel, and I've actually brought this up quite a few times, especially to Ken Levine himself during our interview, and that was the Rapture Zoo. I could only imagine what type of animals would have actually been kept in the zoo, and what would have happened if they were exposed to Adam. What kind of fights could we have gotten into? Could we have fighten an animal like a gorilla, almost like a brute splicer type gorilla, or a giraffe for that example? To me, that is just an insane thought to think about, but ultimately it got cut, and I know the developers were actually really upset about having to remove this level because they really wanted this to be in the finished game, and I think it would have added perfectly to Fort Frolic, especially with how hectic that whole area is. But alas, we will never see the light of day of the Rapture Zoo, unless someone wants to make a fan mod out there. If you do, let me know. I will definitely record it and I'll review it. Next, we'll be looking at the original Gatherers. So push the Little Sisters aside. We're going to be talking about some weird shit here. So on screen now you can see an early quote-unquote humanoid Gatherer, which looks absolutely terrifying. And other than that, they wanted to do other things that I've mentioned in the past, like a crippled dog in a wheelchair, the frog with a funnel up its ass, etc. There was a ton of ideas that they had, but finally they decided, I don't know out of where, but to use the Little Sisters, and it worked out for the best personally. So also there was another thing cut from the Little Sisters because he wanted to leave the choice of morality up to the player. So there was going to be sort of an angel and a devil risk and reward factor for either rescuing or harvesting, which we did get a version of that in the game, but not to the extent that Ken Levine wanted it. And also at one point in time, their eyes were going to be glowing red instead of yellow. So the more you know. So there was going to be an actual fourth type of Big Daddy that was in development, and unfortunately it didn't get past the art stage, and that was the Slugbug Big Daddy. Every time I hear that name, I think of the Volkswagen and the actual Slugbug game I would play with my younger siblings, but that's besides the point. So basically this, you can see on screen, would have had the sea slug or a sea slug type of creature almost attached to the Big Daddy on its shoulder, almost parasitically, if that makes sense. Again, it was cut during the concept art, but the overall concept art for it looks pretty badass in my personal opinion. Here's one that I wish would have made the final product, because take a look on screen right now and tell me this thing does not look sick. This is the Atom Anomaly, and this was an enemy concept that was even brought out before production of the game began, so in the very, very early concept stages. Now this would have been an amalgamation of a lot of different things you could have found all throughout Rapture, some of which would have been weapons, some of which would have been tonic advertisements, all mashed up together to create this almost abomination type figure. I don't know if you want to call it an enemy, I don't know if you want to call it a machine. Regardless, it looks sick, and I think it would have fit perfectly within the horror scheme and the horror aspect of Rapture. Let me know what you think down in the comments. So the final three cut pieces of content I'd actually like to talk about within Bioshock's portion of this video can actually be found within the Museum of Orphan Concepts. If you want to check out a video that I made on that quite a while ago, I'll put a card at the top right hand of the corner of the screen for you. All you have to do is click on it, watch it, then come back to this one. If not, I'll leave a link down in the description below. The first one is Stitchy, which is also known as a ranged aggressor, and it was the first splicer ever created. Obviously, it does not look like the splicers we know in the game, so that one is definitely one I'm glad got cut out. And one of the lead artists, Sean Robertson, actually labeled it as probably the worst abortion that Irrational has ever made, so that is hilarious to me. Next up, we have the Yam Hand, and again, it was an early concept from a splicer, and it just was not made for Rapture. Another creator, which was Rob Waters, said it kind of made you wonder what the heck is going on under that dingy burlap sack. And yeah, what is going on, because its body is so disproportionate to itself that either he's been working out his left arm a lot or something else is going on and I don't want to know. And then finally, we have the missing link. And this would have been more of a monstrous splicer, and this would have been basically at the point where a human who was splicing up too much was on the verge of becoming a full-blown splicer where they would have lost their minds. Again, it was cut from the game, but I think this one would have made the most amount of sense to keep in the game. But I trust Irrational, I trust Ken Levine, and I'm glad that they made the right choice with this. Now let's move on to Bioshock 2. Moving on to Bioshock 2, we have some absolutely badass concept arts for a lot of enemies, a lot of those including splicers. The first one I want to cover are the crawlers, and this was supposed to be a rather disturbing looking model, as you can see on the screen now. It would have had an additional mouth on the back of its head, obviously caused from mutations from splicing and just the overall exposure to Adam, and this one would have been terrifying to fight. It really gives me Spider Splicer type vibes, but can you imagine shooting one in the face and then all of a sudden it turns around and has another face? That one would have been terrifying, especially on your first playthrough of Bioshock 2, but that's just my own personal opinion. Staying on the topic of splicers, let's look at the aqua splicers, because there was rumors that there was going to be a lot of underwater combat during the underwater scenes in Bioshock 2, which would have been incredible, but that is just a little bit of a side note from me. You can see on screen now, these things would have been terrifying to come up against. And again, this only made it past the concept art or around the concept art stage, and there were going to be two forms. One, when you were inside of Rapture, it would have actually walked around like a normal human or as close to a human as possible. And when it was in the water, it would have been swimming around just like nothing. And again, you would have been able to actually fight these things. So to have not only worry about the splicers within Rapture, you would have to worry about these things too, and every single underwater level, you would have to worry about them. It would have added a little bit more danger and a little bit of awareness to the game as the player when you progress through these levels, in my personal opinion. These next four I'm going to try to do in a rapid fire succession type mode, because although they are cool concepts, they're just that, obviously, concepts, and there's not too much information known about them. First and foremost, we have the Jesters, and these I assume would have been splicers that maybe were in Fort Frolic and were stuck there and just kind of adapted to their surroundings by splicing within their costumes. Again, not too much is known, so I can't really go in depth about them. Next up, we have Rapture survivors. These would not have been splicers at all. These would have just been random civilians that you would have encountered in Rapture as Subject Delta, and obviously they would have tried to scavenge as much as possible in order to survive. Whether that's weapons, things like guns, swords, etc. They could have hoarded Adam as well if they needed it, but ultimately, again, it was cut. Good idea, but I don't think it would have been good in concept. Next, we have the original Alpha series, and these look terrifying than what we got in the original game. Obviously, they would have been a lot more mutated and a lot more beefy in terms of their overall frame. So I would have loved to see them in the game. Unfortunately, we weren't so blessed in order to get that. And then finally, we have the Demo Daddy. This one I know a lot of you guys enjoy, and I just enjoy the name. But it was also known as the Egg Daddy as well. This one is an absolute unit of a Big Daddy, and for whatever reason, again, it was cut. It would have been more of a military style defense of a Big Daddy, so I can imagine that they would have surrounded Rapture in order to protect it from people trying to get in or trying to attack it, but If they made it inside of Rapture, I have a feeling these things would have been a pain in the ass to fight. Let me know what you think of them down in the comment section below, please. Very quickly, before I discuss the little brothers, which is going to be the last piece within Bioshock 2 I'll be covering, I have a very quick question for you guys. Do you want to see this become a potential series? Obviously, there's enough removed content in the Bioshock series that I could potentially make 3, 4, or even a part 5 of this video in particular. So if you wouldn't mind being so kind, let me know down in the comment section below, or subscribe if you're new and enjoy the content, or you can even leave a like on the video. All of that helps and it's greatly appreciated. If we can hit anywhere from 100 to 300 likes, I know that's a big gap there, but if we can do that, I'll make a part 2 for you guys. Deal? Deal. Now, let's talk about the little brothers, and then we'll move on to the 3 to 5 games worth of content in Bioshock Infinite. So the little brothers would have been just like the little sisters. They were made in order to help gather Adam. Unfortunately, they would have been a failed experiment, and from Ronaldo Tyan, I hope I pronounced his name right, which is one of the concept artists, he says they were supposed to be like little sisters, but they were a failed experiment. Little brothers were supposed to be aggressive, so they couldn't be used for gathering. Unfortunately, like I said, we didn't get them in the game. It would have been nice, it just was not in the cards. Now, let's move on to Bioshock Infinite. Now, in terms of Bioshock Infinite, I really want to cover and discuss the characters that were either removed in general or heavily altered. However, there's one thing in particular I would really like to discuss, and that is that Bioshock Infinite was actually going to have a multiplayer. There was going to be 2 different modes from what we already know. The first one would have been Border Patrol, and it would have been a tower defense style game. And the second co-op mode would have been Spec Ops. Unfortunately, all of these were cut, even though there was a heavy portion of it already designed, and we do have a couple of screenshots of what some of the levels would have looked like, which you could see on screen now. And I think if we would have had multiplayer within Bioshock Infinite, it would have gave that game a lot more longevity and a lot more to do within the game itself. Do you think multiplayer would have worked out in Bioshock Infinite? I personally think it would have. Let me know down in the comments your thoughts and opinions. So the first character we're going to discuss went through a lot of alterations within the development of Bioshock Infinite, and she's one of the main characters, that being Elizabeth. Originally, she was going to be 17 years old instead of 19 or 20, around that ballpark we actually see within Bioshock Infinite, but the devs felt that she was too young for the actual game, obviously. And the first overall prototype would have been labeled as the Gibson Girl, and we could see this from a couple of different reveal trailers that they put out. She would have been completely mute, which I don't think would have added for a good character in this case in terms of Bioshock Infinite, where Elizabeth can actually point out information for you. But the only things she would have actually been able to provide were pointing different directions or throwing you ammo and salts like Elizabeth does in the finished game. So let me know, would you have preferred the Gibson Girl Elizabeth, or do you like the Elizabeth that was in the final version of Bioshock Infinite? Next up, we have the original Daisy Fitzroy. Again, we can go back to the early E3 trailers of Bioshock Infinite. More specifically, I believe it's the 2011 one, where you can actually see a white Daisy Fitzroy, and I believe she's Irish if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong. But the concept art that you can see on screen now shows a completely different character model for Daisy Fitzroy, and eventually they switched her completely, which I totally agree with. It makes more sense within the context of the game, And then they just gave this character model the codename of Vox Lady. So she could have just been used in the Vox Rebellion. You could have just thrown her character model in. Wouldn't have made that much of a difference. But I ultimately believe that the character change, the race change, and the actual accent change or the dialect change was absolutely imperative to make Daisy Fitzroy who she was within Bioshock Infinite. Although they're labeled as enemies, I wouldn't consider the automatic gentlemen enemies per se. Essentially, they would have been servants, or as we know, Columbia, they would have been automatonic slaves to the rich of Columbia. We would have seen them all throughout Columbia, and they closely resemble the dollar bill machine and the vigor machine as well. So again, I don't know if they would have been hostile if you went up to them. I'm sure they would have been, especially when they know that you're the quote-unquote false shepherd, but it would have been nice to see more enemy diversity within Bioshock Infinite. Speaking of enemy diversity, we have the Claw Daddy, which is one of the most badass looking ones that I've seen yet, and just look at the concept art for this thing. It would have had a crab-like exoskeleton that would have actually grabbed people and ripped them in half. That sounds so sick, just from a gameplay standpoint. So can you imagine the executions that Booker was doing with the Skyhook? Can you imagine the Claw Daddy doing that with someone random from Columbia, just grabbing a citizen and ripping them in half? Or if they got a hold of Booker or Elizabeth and seeing the chaos that would ensue, that would have been incredible. And this one in particular seems like it would have been awesome to actually fight. Let me know what you think down in the comments, please. Again, we're gonna have another sort of rapid fire section here, because the next couple of enemies I want to talk about, there's not too much information on them, although their concept art is absolutely incredible. So this first one is within the same reveal trailer that the Gibson Girl model was shown. There's an unnamed or sort of a prototype enemy. This kind of looks like potentially a turret or a security camera sort of enemy, but let me know what you think. Next, let's move on to Electro Gloves. This was an enemy that was cut fairly early in production, and it would have been a powered exoskeleton, which I imagine through some sort of shock jockey, where it would have shot firebolts of electricity out of its hands at enemies, again, similar to how shock jockey is used. Next, we have the Enhancer, and for whatever reason, it was also known as Snake Oil. That one just doesn't make sense. And it was cut from the final version of the game. They have a potion or a sort of selection of potions on their sides, as you can see in the actual screenshot, and they would have used them almost like grenades. So I wonder if there would have been a poison type, if there would have been a blinding type, a burning type, etc. So that one could have been rather unique to come across within Bioshock Infinite. The final one I want to talk about in a little bit of detail are the Fink factory workers. In game, we see that they actually can roam around freely, walking, all of that. The original design of them would have been strapped to a machine to where they could only work in a specific area without moving, without sitting, without resting, without laying down. You can see the concept art on the screen now. It would have been absolutely brutal, but I would not have put it past Jeremiah Fink to do something like this to his workers. And then we have the Freaks. These would have been extremely mutated people, and their heads would have actually been locked inside cages, and they would have grown up to about 9 to 10 feet tall. They would have had all of the characteristics of a splicer that was trapped in Columbia, but these just look absolutely terrifying, and I could only imagine coming across them, let's say in Comstock House or that part of the game. So there's that. The final thing I'd like to discuss within this video on the topic of Bioshock Infinite is 2K Marin, and this would have been a huge what if or what could have been situation. So 2K Marin obviously had a huge part in developing Bioshock 2, but mainly in my personal opinion, they created the best DLC that we've ever received in Bioshock, that being Minerva's Den. So originally, 2K Marin was going to create the first DLC for Bioshock Infinite. This would have taken place on a section of Columbia that would have been set in the ocean. Not sure if it would have had some sort of ties to Rapture. I'm sure it would have, whether it was Columbia discovering Rapture, Columbia going to Rapture and invading. The possibilities are just endless and honestly limitless, but apparently it wasn't up to standards, so the whole idea and the whole concept was just scrapped. Irrational then took over the development of the first DLC, and lo and behold, we get Clash in the Clouds. That is a bummer. If we could have had anything like Minerva's Den in Bioshock Infinite, that would have been phenomenal. And it's such a letdown to know that this could have been a possibility, but at least in my personal opinion, Burial at Sea episode 1 and 2, I know it's pretty divisive. I personally enjoyed it. I know you might have enjoyed it as well, or you could have possibly hated it. But could you imagine if we had something equivalent to a Minerva's Den in Bioshock Infinite? How drastically better of a game and overall experience that would have been. What could have been? What could have been indeed. So ladies, gentlemen, and everybody else watching, I hope you enjoyed this video. I love covering cut or removed content, so like I asked earlier, if you want this to be a series, please let me know by either leaving a comment, leaving a like, or subscribing. It's all completely free and it does greatly help out the channel. Also, if you want to stay up to date with me outside of YouTube, or if you want to stay up to date with videos in general, ringing the bell and turning on all post notifications is the best way to be notified when I upload or when I live stream. And if you want to talk to me outside of YouTube, social media and my Discord server are the best ways to do that, the links to which will be in the description below. Come and join our community. We have a wonderful one there, and I would love for you to be a part of that. With that being said, a couple of videos should be popping up on the screen now if you want to check those out. And with that being said, take care, stay safe, and I will talk to you all again very, very soon. Have a great day, my friends. Take care.